For 6 months, my life was measured in sets and reps, in the rhythmic clang of iron and the low-grade burn in muscles I hadn't known existed. The gym was my sanctuary and my purgatory. It was the only place where the suffocating quiet of my apartment was replaced by a different kind of silence, the focused, breath-held quiet of exertion. And it was the only place I saw him. Julian. He wasn't my trainer, not officially. He was just a trainer, one of the handful that roamed the floor at Apex Fitness, their branded black shirts stretching across broad backs, their voices a low murmur of encouragement or correction. But to me, he was the only one there. I'd chosen this gym specifically because of him, after a friend had dragged me along for a guest pass, and I'd spent an hour pretending to understand the elliptical while my eyes followed him across the weight room. My life outside those walls was a study in beige. I worked as a data analyst, translating human behavior into spreadsheets and charts. It was a job that suited my nature, quiet, observational, at a safe distance from the messiness of actual interaction. I lived alone. I ate alone. I watched movies alone. I had convinced myself this was contentment, a self-sufficient peace. But watching Julian, I felt the first cracks in that carefully constructed facade. He moved with a kind of deliberate grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He wasn't bulky in the way some of the others were, all puffed up pride and strained sinew. He was dense, solid, like he was carved from something heavier than the rest of us. He had dark, unruly hair that he constantly pushed back from his forehead, and eyes that seemed to absorb all the harsh fluorescent light of the gym and give nothing back. They were watchful, perceptive. I often felt their sweep across the room and had to force myself not to look up from my phone, my heart giving a pathetic little lurch. For months, this was our entire relationship. Me, watching him from afar. Him, blissfully unaware of the narrative I was spinning in my head. I learned his schedule. I knew he preferred coffee black. I knew he had a soft spot for the elderly woman who came in for water aerobics, always greeting her with a smile that was startlingly gentle on his usually serious face. I was a stalker in athletic shorts, an analyst cataloging data points of a person I'd never truly spoken to. The loneliness had become a physical ache, a hollow space in my chest that no amount of bench pressing could fill. So I did the stupidest, most terrifying thing I could think of. I walked up to the front desk, my palms sweating, and asked to book a package of personal training sessions. With Julian. The woman at the desk, Brenda, a perky blonde who always remembered my name, smiled. Great choice. Julian's the best. He's got an opening next Tuesday at 7-inch. And just like that, the catalyst was dropped into the placid pool of my life. I was going to have to actually speak to him. That first session was an exercise in controlled panic. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, gone through a warm-up routine I didn't need, and was pretending to stretch when he walked over. Up close, he was taller than I'd thought. The scent of clean laundry, a faint hint of mint, and the uniquely sterile smell of the gym clung to him. Leo, he asked. His voice was even lower than I'd imagined, a low rumble that vibrated right through my sternum. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah. Hi, Julian. Good to meet you properly. Ready to get to work. He offered a small, professional smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze was intense, analytical. I felt like one of my spreadsheets, being scanned for errors and inconsistencies. Ready as I'll ever be, I managed, trying for a casual tone that came out sounding strangled. He led me to the squat rack, and the observation began. Only this time, it was mutual. His focus was entirely on me. He watched the way I moved, the line of my back, the angle of my knees. His instructions were clear, concise, stripped of any unnecessary chatter. Drop your hips lower. Keep your chest up. Drive through your heels. His proximity was a constant, low-level hum against my skin. He'd stand just behind me, a looming, warm presence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Occasionally, a correction would be accompanied by a touch, a hand on my lower back, firm and impersonal, guiding me into the correct posture. Fingers tapping my shoulder blade. Retract here. Each point of contact was electric, a jolt to my system that had nothing to do with the exercise. I spent the entire hour trying to regulate my breathing, trying to focus on the burn in my quads instead of the heat of his body so close to mine. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way his knuckles were scarred, the small, silver ring he wore on his thumb, the way he'd bite his lower lip slightly, when he was concentrating on my form. The sessions became the two fixed points in my week, the twin suns around which my sad little planet revolved. Tuesday and Thursday, 7 post-meridian. I lived for them. I spent the days in between replaying every word, every gesture, every fleeting look. I became an expert in the geography of Julian. I knew the exact spot on his bicep where a vein would pulse when he demonstrated a lift. I knew the sound of his breathing when he spotted me, a steady, controlled rhythm that was both calming and deeply unsettling. My analysis went into overdrive. He was my trainer. His job was to touch me, to watch me. That hand on my back? It was a correction, nothing more. That compliment on my improved deadlift? Standard positive reinforcement. I told myself this over and over, a mantra to keep the hope from growing into something unmanageable. But my treacherous body, my traitorous heart, refused to listen. The touches started to feel different. Or maybe it was just me. A hand that rested on my shoulder a second longer than necessary after I completed a set of pull-ups. His fingers brushing mine when he handed me my water bottle, a fleeting contact that sent a spark up my arm. Once, while I was setting up for hip thrusts, an exercise I already found mortifyingly suggestive, he knelt beside the bench to adjust the weight. Our knees brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but he didn't pull away immediately. He just stayed there for a beat, his gaze holding mine, an unreadable expression on his face. Then he stood up and said, "All right, let's see 10-inch. My internal monologue was a frantic, looping argument. He felt it. He must have felt it. Followed immediately by, "Get a grip." It was nothing. You're projecting your pathetic fantasies onto a man who is just doing his job. I was getting stronger, my body changing in ways that were undeniably positive. My shirts fit better across my chest, my posture was straighter. I should have been thrilled. But the physical transformation felt secondary to the emotional turmoil he was putting me through. I was a raw nerve, constantly exposed. The gym was usually still bustling at that hour, a chaotic symphony of grunts, clanking weights, and terrible dance music pumped through the overhead speakers. But one Thursday, a storm rolled in, a sudden, violent downpour that seemed to have scared everyone else off. The place was nearly deserted. The music was turned down low, and the only sounds were the rain hammering against the high windows and the hum of the air conditioning. The atmosphere was different, quieter, more intimate. The professional barrier between us, usually a solid, invisible wall, felt porous. We moved through my workout, the silence between sets stretching longer than usual. It wasn't an awkward silence, though. It was comfortable, weighted. We were finishing up with some core work, and I was lying on a mat, exhausted and drenched in sweat. He was sitting on a nearby bench, making notes in his logbook. "So," he said, his voice startlingly loud in the quiet room. He didn't look up from his book. "What do you do when you're not here, torturing yourself?" The question caught me off guard. He'd never asked me anything personal before. Our conversations were strictly limited to fitness goals and nutrition advice. I'm a data analyst," I said, sitting up. "I work for a market research firm." He finally looked up, a flicker of something in his eyes. "Interest? You look at numbers all day?" "Basically. I look at numbers to figure out what people want." He closed the book and set it aside. "And what do they want?" "The usual, I guess," I said, shrugging. "Security. Convenience. To feel like they're part of something." My own words hung in the air, a sad little confession. He held my gaze. "And what about you, Leo? What do you want?" My heart hammered against my ribs. The question was too direct, too perceptive. I wanted to tell him, "I want you to look at me the way you're looking at me right now, but outside of this gym. I want to know if the scent of your cologne lingers on your skin when you wake up. I want to feel your hand on my back when you're not just correcting my form." Instead, I gave him the safe answer. To get through this workout without collapsing would be a good start. He let out a low chuckle, a sound that seemed to warm the air around us. "Fair enough." He stood up, the moment of vulnerability passing. "One more thing. Bench press. Let's see if we can hit a new personal record." He led me to the bench. My mind was still reeling from his question. The intimacy of the quiet gym, the personal turn in our conversation, it had all conspired to dismantle my defenses. I was buzzing with a nervous energy that had nothing to do with lifting. He loaded the bar. It was more weight than I'd ever tried before. "You can do this," he said, his voice a low murmur beside my ear. I've got you. I positioned myself on the bench, gripping the cold, knurled steel of the bar. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the recycled, antiseptic air. I looked up at him. He was leaning over me, his face set in concentration, his dark eyes focused entirely on me. For a second, the rest of the world fell away. There was only the weight, the bench, and him. On your count, he said. I lifted the bar from the rack. The weight was immense, pressing down on me, demanding my full attention. I lowered it slowly, controllably, until it touched my chest. I felt the familiar strain in my pecs and shoulders. I pushed. The bar moved. Up, 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 and then it stalled. Halfway. My arms started to shake. A flicker of panic shot through me. I was going to fail. Right here, in front of him. The weight began its slow, inexorable descent back towards my chest. My breath hitched. Before the panic could fully take hold, he was there. His hands were on the bar, strong and sure, effortlessly taking the weight. But he didn't just lift it. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward, his body moving behind mine on the bench. He re-racked the weight with a solid, definitive thump, and then he leaned down. His chest pressed against my shoulders. His warmth enveloped me. I could feel the solid wall of his torso, the heat radiating through my thin shirt. His face was right next to mine, his mouth just inches from my ear. I could feel his breath, warm and minty, against my skin. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. And then he spoke, his voice a low, intimate vibration that traveled from his chest into mine. Don't move yet. Time stopped. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, the only sound in the universe. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only feel the pressure of his body against mine, the ghost of his breath on my neck, the scent of him, clean, masculine, overwhelmingly Julian. Every nerve ending in my body was on fire. This is not professional. This is not part of the training session. My mind is screaming, a chaotic siren of alarm and a desperate, soaring hope. He doesn't move. He just stays there, pinning me to the bench with his presence. It's only for a few seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10. It feels like a lifetime. The air is thick, charged with everything we haven't said for the past 6 months. Every stolen glance, every casual touch, every carefully chosen word culminates in this single, suspended moment of impossible closeness. I can feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against my back. Or maybe it's mine. I can no longer tell where I end and he begins. Then, as slowly as he leaned in, he pulls back. The warmth is gone. I feel a sudden, sharp sense of loss, of cold. I'm still lying on the bench, my hands hovering in the air where the bar used to be. I feel exposed, raw. I slowly sit up, my limbs feeling heavy and uncoordinated. I don't dare look at him. I stare at my own shaking hands, my gaze fixed on my knuckles, white from a grip I no longer held. The silence in the gym is no longer comfortable. It's a roaring vacuum, filled with the deafening sound of my own pulse. Session's over, he says. His voice is rough, strained. I nod, still not looking at him. I grab my towel from the bench and wipe my face, a futile gesture to hide my flushed skin, to give my hands something to do. I feel his eyes on me, a heavy, tangible weight. I finally force myself to meet his gaze. His expression is unreadable. A storm of emotions seems to be warring behind his dark eyes, but his face is a stoic mask. His jaw is tight. He gives a curt, almost imperceptible nod, then turns and walks away towards the staff office, leaving me alone by the bench, my world completely, irrevocably tilted on its axis. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I replayed the moment at the bench press 1,000 times. The feel of his body, the sound of his voice. Don't move yet. It was a command, a plea, a confession. Or it was nothing. It was a safety instruction. I was a client who had just failed a lift, and he was a trainer ensuring I didn't injure myself. My rational brain and my hopeful heart were locked in a cage match, and neither was winning. I considered canceling our next session. I drafted the email a dozen times. Something's come up, feeling a bit under the weather. Each excuse felt like a lie, a cowardly retreat. If I canceled, I would never know. The ambiguity would fester inside me forever. So, with a sense of impending doom, I packed my gym bag on Saturday evening and drove to Apex. The gym was packed, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of our last session. The loud music, the chatter, the clanging of weights. It all felt jarring, abrasive. I felt a desperate need for the privacy we didn't have. Julian was with another client, a tall woman with impossibly long legs. He was demonstrating a kettlebell swing, his movements fluid and powerful. He didn't see me come in. I went through my warm-up on autopilot, my stomach churning with anxiety. I felt like I was walking into an exam for which I hadn't studied. When he was finished with his client, he walked over to me. He wasn't smiling. His face was grim, his eyes dark. "Follow me," he said, his voice low and clipped. He didn't lead me to the squat rack. He didn't lead me to the weight floor at all. He led me past the rows of treadmills, down a short hallway to a door marked staff only. He unlocked it and held it open for me. It was a small, cluttered office. A desk with a computer, a filing cabinet, a mini fridge humming in the corner. It smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies. He closed the door behind us, shutting out the noise of the gym. The sudden quiet was deafening. He leaned back against the door, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked exhausted. "Are we going to talk about it?" he asked. There was no preamble, no small talk. Just the question, hanging in the air between us like a physical object. My mouth went dry. My carefully rehearsed nonchalance evaporated. "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It was a weak, pathetic deflection, and we both knew it. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "Don't, Leo. Don't do that." He pushed off the door and took a step towards me. The small office suddenly felt microscopic. Thursday, at the bench. I looked down at the worn linoleum floor, unable to meet his gaze. "You were just spotting me." I failed the lift. "I've spotted hundreds of people," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "It's never been like that. You know it, and I know it." I squeezed my eyes shut. This was it. The moment of reckoning. He was going to tell me he was sorry if he gave me the wrong impression, that he was strictly professional, that maybe I should find another trainer. The humiliation was already washing over me in a hot, sickening wave. "I'm not just your trainer, Leo." My eyes snapped open. He was closer now, only a foot away. His expression was no longer unreadable. It was open, vulnerable, and it was full of the same terrified hope that was clawing its way up my own throat. "And I think you know that," he finished, his voice barely audible. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, my mind a complete blank. All the witty retorts, all the casual deflections I had rehearsed, they were all gone. There was only the raw, terrifying truth, exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of this tiny, cramped office. He seemed to take my silence as an answer. He took another slow step forward, closing the remaining distance between us. He raised a hand, his movements hesitant, as if he was afraid I might bolt. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed against my jaw, a touch so light it was barely there. "Can I?" he whispered. The question was a plea. I gave a jerky, desperate nod. He leaned in, and the world dissolved. His lips met mine. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft, searching, hesitant. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of mint and coffee and a longing so profound it made my knees weak. My hands, acting of their own accord, came up to grip his shirt, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. The kiss deepened, his other hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. It was a kiss that spoke of months of stolen glances, of unspoken thoughts, of a connection that had been building in the spaces between sets and reps. It was honest. It was real. And it was happening. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel the slight tremble in his hands. He wasn't just the confident, stoic trainer anymore. He was just Julian. And he was just as scared as I was. "So," he breathed, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke. "I guess we're talking about it." A laugh, shaky and full of relief, escaped me. "I guess we are." He didn't say anything else for a long moment. He just held me there, in the quiet of his office, his forehead pressed to mine, his thumbs stroking my skin. It was more intimate than the kiss itself. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection. The noise of the gym, the outside world, my own anxieties, they all faded away into a distant hum. Finally, he pulled back, though he didn't let go of me. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his entire face, chasing away the shadows and the seriousness. "My shift ends in 20 minutes," he said. "Wait for me." I nodded, my voice thick with emotion. "Okay." He gave my neck a final, gentle squeeze before stepping back, putting a sliver of space between us. "Okay, go stretch or something. Try not to look like your world just ended." "I think it just started," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. His smile widened. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." The 20 minutes I spent waiting for him were the longest of my life. I went to a deserted corner of the gym and went through the motions of a cool-down stretch, but my mind was miles away. I felt dazed, like I'd just woken from a long dream. I kept touching my lips, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. But the phantom warmth of his mouth, the memory of his touch, was undeniable. He met me by the front entrance, now dressed in jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. Out of his uniform, he looked younger, more relaxed. The intimidating aura of Trainer Julian was gone, replaced by something softer, more approachable. The sight of him in normal clothes, waiting for me, sent a fresh wave of giddiness through me. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" I replied, my voice still a little shaky. "Dinner? A walk. Just not being here." He gestured vaguely at the gym around us. "I need to be somewhere with you where I'm not tempted to check your form." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Dinner sounds good." We walked out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and gleaming under the streetlights. The world smelled clean, washed new. It felt appropriate. Our first date was at a small, unassuming diner a few blocks from the gym. It was awkward at first. We were two strangers who had just shared a profoundly intimate moment, and now we had to figure out how to make small talk over greasy burgers and fries. We were navigating a new territory without a map. "So, Data," he said, pushing a stray onion ring around his plate. "Is it exciting?" "It's about as exciting as it sounds," I admitted. "But it's predictable." "I like predictable." "I get that," he said, and he looked at me with an understanding that went beyond the words. I used to be a Marine. Everything was structure and orders. Coming back to civilian life, it was too quiet. Too much choice. The gym has a rhythm, a logic. It made sense when nothing else did. He talked about his time in the service, not about the fighting, but about the camaraderie, the sense of purpose. He talked about his family, about the small town he grew up in. I told him about my job, about the city that had swallowed me whole, about the quiet life I had mistaken for peace. We talked for hours. The initial awkwardness melted away, replaced by an easy, comfortable rhythm. He was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly gentle. The stoic protector I had watched from afar was just one facet of a complex, fascinating man. When he walked me to my car, the silence that fell between us was comfortable, filled with a quiet understanding. "I was so scared you were going to tell me to get lost," I admitted into the darkness of the parking lot. He stopped and turned to face me, taking my hand in his. His palm was warm and strong around mine. "Leo, I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for 2 months. Every time I'd get close, you'd look at me like a startled deer and I'd lose my nerve." "You? Lose your nerve?" I asked, incredulous. "You have no idea," he said, a wry smile playing on his lips. "You're incredibly intimidating. I'm an accountant who can barely bench his own body weight. I'm about as intimidating as a spreadsheet." "You're wrong," he said, his voice soft. He squeezed my hand. "You're quiet. You watch everything. It makes a guy feel seen." He leaned in and gave me a soft, lingering kiss. It was different from the one in the office, less desperate, more certain. It was a promise. The next morning, I woke up feeling light. The familiar weight of loneliness that usually sat on my chest was gone. It was replaced by a humming, hopeful energy. My apartment didn't feel empty. It felt quiet, peaceful. The story ends not there, but a few weeks later. We were at his apartment, a small, neat place that smelled like him, like clean laundry and coffee. It was a Sunday morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. We were in his kitchen, making breakfast together. I was in charge of the toast, a task I felt I could handle without messing up. He was at the stove, scrambling eggs, his back to me. He was wearing a pair of old, soft sweatpants and nothing else. I watched the muscles in his back shift as he moved, the familiar geography of his form now something I was allowed to know, to touch. A feeling of profound contentment washed over me. This was real. This quiet, domestic moment was the happy ending I had never been brave enough to even want for myself. He turned from the stove, a plate of eggs in his hand, and caught me watching him. He smiled that slow, gentle smile that I had come to cherish. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just this is nice." He set the plate on the small kitchen table and walked over to me. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling me back against his chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his warmth seeping into me. I leaned my head back against him, closing my eyes. "Yeah," he murmured into my ear, his voice a low rumble against my spine. "It is." I had spent so much of my life as an observer, watching from a safe distance, analyzing patterns, and predicting outcomes. But in that moment, held in his arms in the quiet of a sun-drenched kitchen, I wasn't analyzing anything. I wasn't predicting. I was just there, a participant. I was no longer on the outside looking in. I was home,